So my name is Josh Morales, and I am with Falafel Software. I'm going to be talking about Microsoft.NET, and this is a little bit more. This is a very introductory course. I'm not going to be doing any code. I probably won't even show you any code because this is more understanding of what the .NET framework is and how, if you are wanting to be developing in it, what it is that you're actually getting by working in this framework. My name is Josh Morales. I can be reached. jmoralesfalafel.com. Falafel.com is a website for my employer. We are a 8-time gold certified partner, and we specialize in Microsoft technologies, also Telerik Control, SmartBear, Sitefinity, Sitecore, Xamarin, which I'll talk about today. But we are here mainly to talk about .NET. And like Alma says, something you want to know about, but you really don't know why. And I guess to answer the question, which you can't see, of why .NET, is to say, why would you want to learn anything? I mean, after all, programming is just binary. Computer only understands zeros and ones. If you know how to do punch cards, you can punch in your binary bits, and the computer will do exactly what you want it to do. Obviously, nobody wants to program like that anymore. And as software languages developed, we started to build abstractions on top of that. Even assembly language is still a layer on top of binary code. And as languages evolved, we started to introduce new technologies, like higher level languages like C++, which some of you are probably familiar with. On top of that, when Windows came around, there was a need to develop graphical interfaces, which is very difficult to do in C++. So there was another abstraction on top of that called Microsoft Foundation classes, which was basically just an interface which simplified the development of things like Windows and graphical elements. After that, we had things like VB6, which was Visual Basic, which was an even simpler model that made it easier for programmers to develop for Windows. And as that continued to evolve, we eventually came to the .NET framework. The initial version was released in 2002. And basically, .NET is a combination of a lot of different technologies, standards, formats, guidelines that you utilize in order to develop applications. And it's composed of a lot of different components. And as the framework evolved from 1.0, where it was just basically a runtime, all the way to now version 4.5, which introduces things like asynchronous programming, modern programming with tablet interface, if any of you use Windows 8, that is running .NET. And it has now been open sourced by Microsoft, and it is a cross-platform framework, as we'll see later, that really empowers you to do a lot of things. So, what specifically is it? Well, the .NET framework is basically made up of different components. And the primary one is a common language runtime. And this is, you can think of this basically as a virtual machine that manages the execution of your programs on top of the operating system, or rather on top of the lower level parts of the operating system within Windows, that gives you a simpler model to develop. It supports multiple languages because they all compile into an intermediary language that is understood by the runtime. So whether you're writing in C#, whether you're writing in Visual Basic, in Python, as long as the .NET language is able to be compiled down to the intermediate language, you can use it to write .NET applications. If any of you are familiar with Java, with its runtime, it ran in a just-in-time compiler. .NET is very similar, but it offers you an entire machine, including state managing memory, managing threads, gives you the ability to catch exceptions. All of this stuff is part of the framework in which you can develop that makes it easier for you to develop things like Windows and web. And we'll talk about some of the different things that you can do. And because it runs inside of this sandbox, inside of this virtual machine, if your application or an application developed with .NET crashes, you're not going to lose the whole machine, you'll just lose that application. Another part of the .NET framework that's important is the base class library, which is basically just a collection of classes that are organized into namespaces that you would then use in your program, in your code, to interact with things like the operating system to open files, write files, connect to the internet, connect to a socket to do network transfers, to create images. Basically, they're just objects that you can interact with that were written as part of the framework, so you don't have to write them yourself. You want to open a file, you don't need to know anything about the file system or even which device you're connecting to. You just open the file namespace in the base class library and follow a unified sys model for just opening a file. And it's very standardized, so it's very intuitive. Now, this also includes things like collections. So if you are needing to make data structures for your application, like you're making a card game, you want to store a list of cards, you don't have to actually write the list to store your cards. You can utilize the collections library that's already in the framework, that's highly optimized, that's thread safe, so that you can focus on just solving the problem that your application is going to do. In addition to the class library is a common type system, and this is just the definition of the different types that are available to your application, whether it's integers to store numbers, strings to store characters, bits, booleans to store yes or no. This is important because the common type system lies within the framework, and it's projected out into the different languages, which means that an integer in C# is identical to an integer in Visual Basic. And that sounds pretty simplistic, but it's very powerful because it really does allow interoperability between different skill sets. So if you've got C# developers on one side of the table and Visual Basic developers on the other side of the table, they can build components that can speak to each other without either one of them having to learn each other's language. It's also very object-oriented, which means that you can use these objects in your as building blocks in your application and extend them to fit the needs of your project or your application or your problem that you're trying to solve, which allows you, to basically use the object-oriented system. Now, the other part of this is memory management, which is key. The .NET framework alleviates a lot of the issues that C++ programmers have, where if you're going to create an object in memory, you are responsible for allocating the memory that the computer is going to use to store that object. So if your object has a cat, you want to instantiate that cat, you have to tell the object, the program, hey, reserve this memory for my cat, so I can stick it in there, and when I'm done using my cat, deallocate the memory so that the rest of my application can use it. It's a pain in the butt, and it leads to a lot of memory leaks and poor performance. And the .NET framework kind of takes that away. And yes, it can lead to lazy programmers, and you can't fix, stupid, which is that, even with those tools, you can still write bad programs, bad memory leaks can still exist, but you no longer have to focus on that low-level aspect. And again, the idea of abstracting these layers where you're working with the hardware, the .NET framework tries to take that away from you and just let you focus on, hey, here's a cat, I need to use my cat, make the cat meow, and now I'm done with the cat, and that's all you have to worry about. So in addition to that, the way that the .NET framework does that is it has a garbage collector that runs as a process in the framework. So as your application is running, different objects are stored in memory in your memory space for your application. So as things are allocated, as your cats are allocated, and they do different things, as long as they are reachable from your program, they'll stay in memory. As soon as the garbage collector runs, it's going to recursively go through every object in your code. And it's going to find all the items that are still reachable, that are still being used. Even if they're not being used, as long as they're being referenced by something that is being used, that means they're important. So it's not going to get rid of them. Everything else is deleted and frees up the memory. And this happens automatically, and it happens completely in a separate process from your application, and it's something that you absolutely do not have to worry about. Which isn't to say that you don't have to worry about memory management. One of the things that's important to remember when working in the .NET framework is, as I said, any item that is referenced by an object in memory will still be stored. So if in your application, your cat has in its possession a ball, and you're not using the ball anymore, but the cat still has possession of that ball is still going to be in memory, and it will be in memory forever until you tell it, oh, you know what, the cat's not using the ball anymore, so you can free it with memory. So it's a different kind of management, and it's a different paradigm of development, but it really lets you focus, again, on the problem that you're trying to solve with your application. So, as I said, .NET supports a lot of languages, a wide variety. C# is obviously the most prominent, and but it's the difference in the language is mostly syntactical. They both, again, compile to the same intermediate language. They all compile to the same intermediate language. And if you are familiar with things like Python and you want that, you can use that as a stepping stone to kind of get into it. You can use that you can use the .NET components in that and develop your applications in that framework. Now, the .NET Stack is basically, again, it's a framework that allows you to create applications, but those applications are not limited to the desktop. You don't only write apps that run in Windows. There is a runtime for the Windows that runs your applications as you develop them, just like you run any application on your desktop. But there's also a runtime that will run on your web server, which is called ASP.NET. And this is, if any of you are developers in PHP, it would be somewhat of an equivalent to Apache, basically a web server. But the web server runs .NET. That means you get the same access in your web application that you're building to the base class library to do things like open a file, write to a file, connect to a service, and you use it using the same language that you would whether you were developing an application, whether you were developing a website, whether you were developing an app for your phone. And the power of the .NET framework really comes when you start to build these reusable components. So let's say you have the need to create an application that's going to be, I don't know, checking the scores of your football team. You can write the application within a desktop that will connect to the service, check the scores, and show them to you. But the service that actually checks those scores can be abstracted out into a .NET class library. And that class library, because it runs .NET, can then be used in your website. Now you can take that exact same code, you don't need to change a single line of it. You can put it inside of your web application, and now you have a website that will show you your football scores. Take that same abstracted class library and put it in a phone application. And now you can use your phone, you can develop a phone application, and the only thing that you're doing differently is creating a different UI for each one. And I'll show an example of that. And like I said, Microsoft.NET runs on a variety of platforms, including web, desktop, mobile. And one of the cool things about the evolution of .NET is that people have started to utilize it, and their vision of the cross-platform ability that Java kind of never achieved is really starting to open things up, and that is most prominent with things like the new universal apps that will allow you to develop for both Windows and Windows Phone using the same application. But in addition to that, there's a company, and you can't see it, called Xamarin, which has taken C# and...
Probably move that back, it has wheels. If you want to move the table.
Well, that's fine. Yeah. Slides will be up, you can kind of look at them. But anyway, Xamarin has taken the C# runtime, and they have basically made it, the .NET runtime, I'm sorry, they've made an implementation that will run on Android and will run on iOS. So suddenly you could take your C# code and change only the platform-specific aspects of it and run your application, the same application, on iOS, Android, Windows Phone 8, Windows 8.1, and Windows Phone 8.1, and even Xbox once the SDK is fully available for everyone to use. And this idea of cross-platform is very powerful because by combining the .NET framework with Xamarin, you can cover pretty much every device. And there's other technologies that give you this cross-platform compatibility that some of you may be familiar with, PhoneGap or Cordova, which is basically a technology that runs a web control in the app, and you use HTML and JavaScript to write apps. And that is cross-platform, but it is a web application. This compiles to native code. So if you write an application in C#, your components will then compile to native code on the iOS and the Android. And you can cover all three platforms with a single code base. And the only thing different between those platforms is strictly the UI. In fact, Xamarin has a new technology called Windows Forms, which literally creates a single project. And in that project, you create views that represent your application, such as a view for the home screen, a view for the list, a view for the details of that list. You define those using the Xamarin technology, and in that single project, when you build it, it automatically projects it into the three different platforms, Windows Phone, iOS, and Android. Which means if you develop the app once, you literally will be able to deploy it to all three platforms simultaneously without having to change any code. And I would really love to talk a lot more about that, and if there is interest on it, on the survey that is accompanying this, if you would like to learn more, I would really love to talk more about it. So please do let me know if this is something that you would like to see in more detail.
It's kind of expensive to put together with Visual Studio at this point, right? You can use Xamarin to develop the apps, and it's cheaper if you're not using Visual Studio.
This is correct.
But when you try to combine and use Visual Studio with it, the amount of money goes pretty high.
That's correct. Xamarin is not a free product. It is, and they do have their own IDE, and IDE basically is a development environment. Visual Studio is the application you use to write programs in .NET. It supports project types like Windows, Windows Phone, Web, and Android, iOS. Xamarin has project types that will open in Visual Studio as well. However, in order to write apps in Visual Studio with Xamarin, you do need a business license. They do have an indie license that anybody can qualify for. To that, you use the Xamarin IDE, not Visual Studio. And it's actually pretty robust. The only thing it doesn't let you do is do the Windows Phone part. You can do both iOS and Android using the Xamarin product. And if this thing works, I would very much like to show you that. But I'll do that at the end, and I'm almost done anyway. Visual Studio actually is now a free product from Microsoft, and the Community Edition is basically identical to the Professional Edition. The only difference is licensing. As long as you don't work for like a million company, you're basically licensed to use this for free. This is not the Express editions. If any of you have ever used Visual Studio in the past, the free Express editions were very entry level and limited. This is not that. You can add extensions like Xamarin to it. It's very powerful. It's basically the professional edition, but licensed for free. If you're a college student or if you are in a startup business, you are eligible also for what's called DreamSpark if you're a student, or BizSpark if you're a small business. And this gives you, I believe, 3 years access to Microsoft Developer Network, which includes things like the Ultimate Edition of Visual Studio, free licenses for Windows 8.1 Pro, Microsoft Office, basically the entire range of .NET development technologies, SQL Server, all of that is available to you for free for 3 years, and I believe as long as you are a student. So ask your advisors, especially your technology department, about DreamSpark if you're a student, because you basically get access to everything for free. No reason not to give it a try. I didn't talk very much about web, and on that survey that's going out, I would like to know, like I said, this is really just a high-level overview of .NET. I would like to talk more about the actual development environment, the coding, and all that. But before I jump in, I want to know, what is it that you want to know more about? You want a C#, know more about C# specifically, building websites, building apps, building, this desktop applications. So please do let me know. But that being said, ASP.NET is the web technology that .NET uses to create websites, and the website ASP.NET, it will get you started on that. Xamarin.com is the developer of the Xamarin technology, and to actually learn about development, .NET and stuff, MSDN is a great resource as far as the documentation of the .NET framework. Everything about what I talked about, the details about it are available there. But my best recommendation is going to be Microsoft Virtual Academy. This is a free training website where Microsoft experts basically sit in front of a camera. They take a topic like C# fundamentals, building websites, building applications, and there's basically a day-long course, and it's completely free. They talk about things from soup to nuts, A to Z, of all different kinds of technologies, not just C#, not just .NET. There's courses on HTML5, there's courses on Python, and they're all free to use, stream on demand at your course. They do live events as well. I learned a crap ton from them, and I can't recommend it enough. If you like something a little bit more guided, a little bit more professional, Pluralsight is a paid training course, and they have topics about everything. There's a 14-day free trial for that. And of course, if you really want to learn or you really want to build, you're always welcome to reach out to me and my company, Falafel.com. And I'll only briefly pitch our Falafel University, which is a year-long subscription that gives you unlimited access to instructor-led training and office hours from the experts that work in our company. There's MVPs, insiders. We got some really great people working with us. But enough of that. Let me see if I can get this thing to work, and I can give you a really quick demo of the Visual Studio and Xamarin running the cross-platform application in C#. And while I do that, please feel free to ask any questions.
And while Josh is doing that, we're going to pass out the quick surveys for you guys, evaluations.
Has anybody used C#? Anybody used Visual Studio, developing? Okay.
Do you think they're going to catch up now that they're using Razor and MVC? I know they went open source, and some of the stuff that now they're starting to use, like Node.js, but do you think they're behind Microsoft, behind the open source? Like, let's say Ruby on Rails and...
It's a different technology, so it's hard to say that they're behind as much as it's different.
Well, the reason is that in our work, we're stuck with a back-end development, and so we have have a designer that does the front end, so we switched from web forms to MVC
Oh,
because
okay.
it's a little bit more cleaner for him
Right.
to do that. But now I'm starting to see the crunch of we don't need a designer and a developer. We want one that knows everything in JavaScript and
Yeah,
behind code.
that's the holy grail, I
And
suppose.
so people that do
$12 an hour,
Ruby on
right?
Rails and some of this other stuff, they know a little bit more of that
Speak
stuff.
Spanish.
And I think Microsoft opened it up, and now people, they saw that JavaScript is coming to the front now by Node.js, and they've added to where you can actually, in Visual Studio 2013, you can actually add, create a real quick app for Node.js. It's just that it's a little bit hard to deploy it, especially to Windows Azure, in making sure that your environment is correct and all that stuff. So
Microsoft has definitely come a long way. There's a lot of stigma attached to what Microsoft does, not just because they're the big evil corporation of the 90s. I think that for the longest time, they were very much a business-oriented application environment. You did it because your company used Office and you needed to write macros, or you had this enterprise technology that your company needed to use, and so you had to be an expert in SharePoint to basically be considered a Microsoft developer. And that's not the case anymore. They have really evolved, and Microsoft, especially in recent years, really has a focus on its developers and tries really hard to create an environment for developers to really flourish using their technologies, which is why they make things like the Visual Studio Community Edition for free. I mean, it's on one hand you want to say, well, they're just putting it out there and it's free, everybody use it. But it's not just a free product, it's a very powerful and robust product. And the technologies that you use as a developer in the Microsoft stack are very much focused on you being a better developer.
because the builds, let's say for any other, like Ruby on Rails or any other environment, are a lot much easier than Microsoft. When you're trying to deploy applications in Microsoft, you're having to set up all these servers. They must have everything that you need to deploy. If there's any little thing wrong with it, your app is not going to work. While others are saying it's just a container, you drop it in there. That's where it's going. But I don't know if Microsoft is going to make it that easy where you can just move an app from one place to the other.
Like Docker, like we were talking about last time. Yeah.
And right now, we're upgrading servers from 2003 to 2008, and the pain of bringing these apps that were built like with 2005 Visual Studio to now, it's like, it's a big pain in the butt. And so, I don't know if we want to keep on going the route. It's starting to look good for Microsoft, but
Well, you know, what it seemed like happened a long time ago is Microsoft didn't have the cool factor, you know, and when Linux really started to take a stronger hold in the marketplace, a lot of people gravitated towards it because it was free and it was easy, and you know, Java was out, and Java was, you know, the savior of the world, right? And everybody could do everything in Java. And Microsoft, you know, like Josh said, was just this big behemoth of a company that no one really wanted to work with, but you had to. Incidentally, what I think ended up happening in the marketplace is you looked at a lot of the applications that were being developed at the time, and the money was being made off of Microsoft applications. So that continued, you know, the forward progress of having a language, or, you know, not just a language, but a development area where they kept on going. MSDN kept on going. I mean, you know, all the visual programming languages kept on going because the enterprise needed that. And we're in a different and unique market now where, you know, like Ruby on Rails is available, JavaScript's available, all these different languages are available. And I think Microsoft, to be honest, it seemed like struggled a little bit to get into that group of, well, it's cool to program with this, and it's cool to develop applications and use this language, because it was a little bit more cumbersome, right, than a LAMP stack. You know, it was a little bit more cumbersome to develop, especially with MSDN, and it was more expensive. But you know what? People were making more money off of the Microsoft platforms than they were off of, you know, until the rise of the app economy, right, where you could freaking program it with a goofy little editor. But now what's happening is it looks like, you know, where it is, and especially, you know, how Microsoft is standing behind their developers now, giving away the good classes of product, not just the free crap that they give away for so long. Sorry guys. that they get away for so long. It was like, oh, this is awesome. It works kind of, but in order to finish my application, I need to spend $1,500 to get the software just to get it, off the ground. It seems like now where Microsoft has gone is they've come a long way to where this stuff is available now, and so now you can write these really comprehensive applications without having to go overboard and build out these, the testing server and this server and that server, where one single error in .NET is going to screw up your entire deal. I think it's coming
That's
a little.
true. The entry
little
point
bit away.
for Microsoft developing with Microsoft has definitely, the barrier to get started has definitely gotten
Yeah,
smaller.
it used to be tremendous.
Yeah, you needed all of these working components, and that's one of the things that the .NET framework has kind of simplified. And so if you want to build a website, you go to Visual Studio, you go to a new project, new website, and everything you need is in your project. You
Where
want to build a
before it
new
was-
application,
you
a
had to
new
figure out where
phone
to
app,
get it all.
it's all self-contained. And
Now,
technology.
even online, if you go to Cloud9 and I want to start a WordPress site,
Don't even get me started on WordPress.
it'll take about 20 seconds to get that WordPress site up.
Yeah, whereas
And all
before
your
it was
code-
front page extensions,
Yeah,
right?
and all your
That
code
too.
is there.
Bad joke.
And Visual Studio right now is behind on, let's say, to do your app or do the whole software development lifecycle, Git is what you need to get into. And the IDE is just not giving you all the power that, or you actually have to use something like SourceTree or something else to do more, because it's not there yet. I mean, it's.
So at the risk of alienating, half of you guys in here looking at a basic class for .NET, it seems like Microsoft has come a really long way, and I'm glad to hear it. Josh is a pretty cool guy, so to know that cool guys are working on this really means a lot. But especially being able to develop applications and stuff using .NET is pretty strong. It's one of those where, from y'all's perspective, it might not be as cool as some of the stuff that's going on with regards to being able to develop an iPhone app using a little goofy GUI editor. But if you start developing with .NET and you start using the stack that Microsoft has on there, you're not going to be out of a job. I mean, if you develop on Ruby on Rails, there's 10,000 other Ruby on Rails developers that are out there all working for pennies on the dollar. I mean, that's just the economy, right? I can get a Ruby app made for $5 in India on Fiverr if I need it. But to get a Microsoft, and you guys know I'm not lying, to get a Microsoft developer to develop a product on .NET that's going to work with one of the top operating systems in the world is going to be a little bit different. So it's one of those, you can't necessarily go wrong learning from one of the biggest corporations in the world.
And-
Let me throw in my 2 cents, sorry Josh.
Go ahead.
Let me throw in my 2 cents also. So if you go, so as somebody that sells, software to people, when you walk in and you've got a competitor who's writing PHP as compared to your .NET stuff, the first thing that the people that are selling .NET stuff are going to say, well, that PHP isn't secure. It's not set. People don't update it, and so therefore your stuff is going to get hacked and your stuff is going to be unsecured. That's a selling point that Microsoft has. That's for some reason, because it's free, some people have a thought. The customer thinks that it's going to be wrong, and that's a selling point. And number 2, the interfaces that .NET makes. Everybody is used to Microsoft Office, Microsoft Word, Microsoft Excel, Outlook, and the interfaces that .NET has gives that familiarity to the user when they're making it. And I know that there's plugins like you can buy other controls that start to look like Microsoft, but I'll tell you that those controls sometimes are not as fluid as the .NET package stuff that comes with it as far as controls are, and users are happier with the experience of using it, because you all got to remember that websites are not just made for marketing purposes. They're not just made for somebody who says, hey, where's the nearest Whataburger, and then goes to Whataburger.com and finds the site. The web development is also made for inside the office. I know that we have several pieces of software where I work that we've developed that are financial and portfolio managers and things of that nature that nobody in the world except for the maybe 10 people in my office that have access to it are ever going to see. And but they're doing complicated mathematics. They're looking at charts and they're looking at live data, and that experience and that is a lot better with a .NET product than it would be with the lamp stack or the PHP stacks that I've
And that's,
seen.
we're not trying to dissuade you guys from looking at other other languages, but I mean, truth be told, I mean, what are the top operating systems right now in a business environment? Now, let's talk about money. Let's not talk about, oh, this is great, it's
No, no, no.
pretty. Let's talk about money.
I believe that it's somewhere in between 20 to 30% of the world is still using XP Pro. And then it was like another 30% of those about 6 months ago that were thinking about updating to Windows 7.
But let's, so I guess my comparison, right, is Apple. There's a lot of Mac products in here, right? And Mac products are great products.
But not in the business world.
Not in the business world, right? And granted, enterprises, I mean, they've taken to them. I'm not trying to say that they're not, but when I sit down in a conference room versus when you sit down in a university, it's 1 out of every 200 devices is a PC, not a Mac. But you sit down in an enterprise environment, and they're all still PCs, all of them. They're less expensive, they're easier to replace. The legacy that's built the PC marketplace is still strongly entrenched. And that might change, someday. That Surface tablet kicks the crap out of any of the iPads that are out there. I mean, I don't know if you guys have used them or not, but that Surface thing is, dude, that smokes any iPad you put in.
They're great iPad.
They're great iPads. And iPads are great, and they definitely have a cool factor, but I guess that's, this is the guys, I've got the iPhone in my pocket, and I've got my, little freaking iPad and whatnot. But it's not the same. When I go into corporate environments, it's all PC. It's all PC based. And if it's PC based, it's Microsoft based. It's just the way the world is right now. It's not to say it's not going to forever be like that.
Yeah, and I would add that I can't speak to things like marketing and business because I am a developer through and through. That's all I know and that's all I do. So, but I will say that the Mac versus PC thing is an interesting one because when you look at the iPad and what it's used for, it's a very consumer-oriented product. You use it to play games, you use it to watch movies, you use it to, go on websites and play Candy Crush and stuff. And it's not to say that they're not productivity tools, but when it comes to the development environment in .NET, one of the reasons that it is so prominent in the business world is that the .NET framework is very well suited to solving business problems. Which is why, like, when you look at Xamarin applications, there's very few games that are written with Xamarin because it's technology that's not used for that. It's, you're gonna write an application to for a library so that they can, target the different platforms and show the information about what they have. Because the .NET framework gives you that that leg up, yeah, because it's designed to be productive. And I mean, it's hard for me not to sound biased. I am a Microsoft guy. I've got Surface. I've got the Windows Phone. I still have the original Zune, and I still use it. So
He's that guy who got that tattoo on.
Yeah. But it is very productive.
PlayStation or Xbox? Anyway, I don't want to derail the conversation too much, but it is, the thing that I like is in these classes and the stuff that we're doing in here, it's fun to talk about the technology and whatever, but I'm an applicability person, right? And I can sit here and dream, everything's perfect in a perfect world, but when it comes down to it, I've got to figure out how to make money tomorrow. Whether I'm a developer, whether I'm a salesperson, whether I'm a technologist, I have to figure out what's going to be applicable in the real world to me and to feed my family. And that being said, for you guys primarily, what's interesting is learning an approach like this, or at least appreciating and understanding it, gives you the ability to have more tools in your toolbox. Yeah. So, and I think
that's an excellent point. And I would say that it's worth exploring because the .NET environment and Microsoft and C#, it's not going to solve every problem. I wouldn't write against Angry Birds in C#. But it does solve a lot of problems, and it does make it easy for you to do a lot of things. And it's something that you should ask yourself, what is it that I want to do? And will this framework help me do it? And that's one of the things that I would really like to be able to help. And the way that I would like to be able to do that is knowing what it is that you as developers or aspiring developers want to do. And let me show you how you can use this framework to solve those problems.
That's a good segue because I know you mentioned the evaluation. I only printed out 10 copies and there's obviously more than 10 of us. But if you go to the URL that was at the last slide, you can do them on your phone, you can do them on a laptop. and you can give feedback that way. But quickly, just for Josh's purposes, just to the hands, who wants to learn more about C# to begin with? Okay. Who wants to learn about Xamarin and mobile development, let's say? Okay. And then lastly, who wants to learn .NET and web services and web pages? Okay.
Also, are you guys, your company, using like Visual Studio Online?
We use Visual Studio Online to host our code, source control, but we all have obviously our own Visual Studio installation. We use everything. We use TFS, Git, Mercurial, Bitbucket, everything. I mean, we're a consulting company, so we work with customers from all over the place. So whatever they use, we use, even if it's Subversion or something terrible like that.
It is pretty horrible though.
But
That leads me to my other point of the academy. If we could have done an academy solely just on one language, solely on one tool set, solely on one IED, but the idea of the voting of the classes, the idea of inviting different speakers and different backgrounds, is because I use more than 10 tools a day. I use more than 3 languages in a project. I don't just stick to one. Although .NET, from the looks of it, really just stick with it and you'll be fine. I think that's one of the major points of today's discussion is really it covers most of the bases, if not everything. But overall the outlook of the academy is for you guys to learn everything as quickly as possible. And so I just wanted to mention that.
sure. And just quickly, this is not working at all, but here I've got the application that I've developed that we'll be releasing soon. It's basically just a little simple app that allows you to search for movies from a specific.
It's the one from
But here it is running on a Windows Phone emulator, and I can also pull up the. Is it gonna work?
Might be a little slow. I think somebody has the Wi-Fi.
For the people that have just walked in, what happened is that his laptop is HDMI and we weren't prepared with a projector to host him.
That's my old school projector from 10 years ago. If someone wants to donate a new one, please feel free.
Or if you want to email your Microsoft rep, get them to donate some stuff. We'll take that too.
We'll take anything free.
Speaking of free, I noticed you guys didn't get up and walk, but it's supposed to be like a fluid environment kind of thing. But there's soft drinks as well as beer if you're 21 and over only, please. There's pizza, and if you're gonna have beer, just put it in the cup.
Yeah.
But I think Josh has one more thing.
It's not working, so I'm not gonna worry about
maybe
it.
just huddle around him.
If anybody does want to see it, I'll be happy to show. And if you have any questions about .NET, Falafel, C#, anything, I'm right here.
Awesome. Let's thank our speaker.
Well, thank you.